The world around was covered with snow, blinding the boys with a white cover. They rose to a snow-covered mountain for their club training camp. But now the descent seemed impossible. VR games already had weapons and magical coils, although modern technologies have not yet allowed to feel or touch objects in the game. The guy in a white jacket spoke with interest about VR and expressed his desire to test him. He was convinced that his friend would be a great character, and since he has already played this game, they could become stronger together. Marius opened his eyes in a strange place, feeling unclear anxiety. Trees stood around, and he suggested that he was in the forest. However, there was no cold, and he thought, maybe this place is paradise. He felt strange relief. Leaning to the water, Marius was going to wash, but when he was reflected, he froze. He no longer recognized himself. He looked at his clothes more closely and noticed that his mantle remained unchanged. He tried to call the system menu for exit, but to no avail. Then he was thought of, what if he can use magic? He tried to create a small flame, and suddenly caused a powerful fire. Realizing that at least magic was obeyed, he began to experiment further. If the weakest of 13 types of magic was so powerful, then something was wrong. The game did not exist in the game, and it made him think, is he really in the game? It caused a water spell, and heavy rain began over the forest. 2 suns shone in the sky, forcing Marius to doubt again that it was a game. But because he could use magic, there was no other choice. It was necessary to learn to control it. The steps were heard behind him. He turned. A girl stood in front of him. Her appearance stunned him. Instinctively, he was going to attack, but at the last moment he restrained. After all, he did not understand what was happening. I'm Marius, he introduced himself, apologizing to the girl. He wanted to find out where he found himself. She answered something incomprehensible. Suddenly, he felt that he could make a mental connection with a girl using telepathy magic. Marius mentally apologized and assured her that he had not intended to harm. The girl spoke alarmed in her own language, but he still did not understand her words. Despite the language barrier, he noticed that she was very beautiful. She, with a gesture, invited him to follow her and led to a huge hollow in the tree. Marius was not sure she said, but realized her home. There was a lot of space inside. Marius even asked herself if she lived here alone. In one of the rooms, he saw a bed specially prepared for him. It surprised him, but he was grateful for the shelter, as dangerous monsters could be wandering outwardly. The girl turned away for a short time, and then suddenly returned to him, raised the edge of the dress a little, and got the apple from there. She stretched his Marius. It was unexpected. Marius froze, trying to hide confusion. He looked at her. She smiled. For some reason, it seemed to him that they were both alone in this world. Bite a piece of apple, he felt his pleasant, sweet taste. Suddenly, sounds were heard from the outside. Marius tensed. Maybe her parents have returned? But something told him that the girl was in danger. He shouted to her to run. In a panic, he mentioned that he needed to act quickly. The most gnosable among all was the magic of lightning. He strongly approached the girl and asked her to leave, assuring that he would quickly deal with the threat. But suddenly she became between him and the monsters, as if protecting them. The girl exclaimed something, and Marius finally realized these creatures were her friends. He apologized because he didn't know it. Using the magic of the evaluation, he became convinced that the monsters are still alive but paralyzed and do not pose a threat. He then used the magic of recovery to heal them. Looking at the girl, Marius realized she does not trust him, and he couldn't blame her. Orcancabald slowly came to her senses, and the girl looked extremely happy. Marius thought, it is strange to see friendship with monsters, who were usually considered evil. He realized that he could also be her friend, but after his actions it was unlikely. He felt incredible in his hand and understood that this may be revenge for his previous act. The girl was indignant at the orca, and even more angry, seeing that Cabald also used all her strength. This is how their strange life and unforgettable adventures began. 2 months have passed since Marius got into this world. It turned out that Cabald was called Ben. At first, when they could not communicate, Marius felt uncertain. But thanks to Ben's efforts, he gradually learned to speak and write. Suddenly, someone called them. It was a girl named Annette. She suggested that they take a short break after hard work. Always when Annette came, they began to eat. It saved Marius because the food was incredibly delicious, and he felt alive again. To help Marius better master the language, Ben made him repeat complex words, although it was not easy. But every day Marius was talking more and more. The orc approached them and noticed that Marius is talking much better. He was called Dallin. Although he had a harsh look, it was really very responsive. Dallin led Marius to a small fence, looked at it, and said that everything was looking good. Marius agreed, and added that it was exactly what he expected. And then he jokingly expressed his desire to have a real Japanese bath. At first, everyone was indifferent, but then someone remembered that Marius could use the magic of water. He decided to try to create a hot bath, but reduced the power of the spell to avoid trouble. Demonstrating his abilities, Marius gathered water without any words, and then heated with fire, without boiling. Everyone was amazed. Ben even noted that Marius's confidence in her own power was not just words. Marius himself thought that his first words after his language was about his ambitions. Dallin was staring at him in surprise, asking where he came from. Then, staring, he noted that such frankness is too much. When the bath was ready, Marius jokingly suggested that he swim together, explaining that it was called naked shift. Dallin only thanked, but he politely refused. Marius enjoyed a hot bath, feeling the warmth relaxes the body. This may have been due to the fact that hot water improves blood circulation in humans. At this point, his head was overwhelmed by his thoughts, and he realized that it was time to think carefully. He thought about the world in which he found himself. He could use magic just as in Fall's game, and his clothes were identical to the game. This suggested that this world was somehow related to the game. However, this place seemed too perfect. There were no monsters here, the weather was wonderful, and the food was enough. Judging by the climate, it was now spring or autumn, and the forest seemed endless, and Marius felt the only one here. His reflection was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of the net, which for no doubt decided to go to the bath. Marius noticed that she was absolutely not ashamed. And yet he goes straight to him. He reflexively retreated, stunned by her confidence. He was curious about whether bathing is common here. His excitement may look strange. He tried to keep calm, but still decided to get out. The grid smiled and said she would come back now to help him. Going closer to Ben, she apologized for making him wait. A little later, Dallin approached Marius and asked how he appreciated the bath. Marius sincerely replied that she was wonderful, and thanked Dallin for the opportunity to visit her daily. He then handed him a potato pack. They approached the net and said with a smile that the bath, which Dallin was set up, was really wonderful. She also reported that today is a holiday, so it was possible to eat enough. Ben noted that most products are canned foods that will soon be spoiled. Marius first saw an orca who adored food and got along with people. Or perhaps Dallin was just special. He remembered how Dallin first gave him food, how they sang songs together, which Marius did not understand, and how he was surprised by the appearance of fruit beetles, which in a moment ate a whole basket of food. Marius also remembered how he gradually began to memorize their names, calling everyone by name. These moments became valuable memories for him that strengthened his connection with new friends, people, and monsters. Quiet and peaceful days seemed to him a real comfort. However, he understood that at any moment everything could change. Dallin, despite the visible wealth, continued to collect food stocks for a rainy day. The next day, Marius decided to try more powerful magic. He was wondering if he would be able to restrain her with a control spell. Realizing the risks, he asked everyone to move away. He then activated a new spell that broke out in front of him with hissing energy. Hiding behind the tree, Ben twisted and exclaimed whether Marius could hold back a little, because it really began to annoy. Marius apologized to explaining that he tried to control power, but, to prove what he can do, he used another spell. Heavenly breathing, which immersed the goal in sleep. At the same time, there is a trace, the freezing tomb marker. Ben, turning to Marius, noted that he is a truly striking person. However, he immediately added that Marius has been guilty for a whole week. Surprised, Marius approached and asked what he was in mind, but Ben just waved and asked him to silence. They went to collect mushrooms, but suddenly, Marius felt something wrong. Unknown men started talking about something nearby. One of them, looking carefully at the area in binoculars, stated that there could be no mistake. This is exactly the girl. Turning to the captain, the man reported that he found their goal. The captain ordered to be divided into 2 units and to act according to plan. He stressed that their goal was only a girl, and everyone else could be killed. Meanwhile, Marius and the rest continued to train pronunciation. Ben was angry because Marius could still pronounce only names. In response, Marius just laughed. assuring that one day he would cease to be so problematic. Non worried Dallin and asked what had happened. Dallin replied briefly that they seemed to be found. Everyone was silent. Someone asked how close the pursuers. The answer was disappointing. About 5 kilometers. There were 5 of them. Marius said whether they pursue them. Dallin only nodded, confirming the worst fears. Dallin quickly decided, they leave this place in 5 minutes. He ordered everyone to take as much food as possible. At the same time, he smiled and noted that thanks to their stocks, they have everything they need. Marius, licking, said he would like to try to cook salmon. Then, contacting Dallin, he asked if they would ever come back here. Dallin thought, and then said that the next place should be even better. 5 nights ago, deep in the forest, Ben, Dallin, and Annette discussed whether Marius should be left with them. Dallin believed that the fugitive life would be too difficult for him. Given his weakness in battle, it was a risk. But Ben denied, noting that Marius significantly improved his language skills. It was in favor of everyone, and after all, it is better for a person to live among their own. Suddenly, Ed announced that all the preparations were completed. Dallin urged everyone to go and added that they need to move quietly as possible until they leave this forest. He also noted that it would be a difficult journey. Marius, listening carefully, noticed that everything around was still quiet. He suggested that they could move faster now. Ben agreed, and everyone began to hurry. Using the magic of physical strengthening, Marius felt his body lighter and stronger. Now he was convinced that he would not be behind others. Suddenly, Mary turned sharply and asked who they were. Marius asked why the law hunts for Annette. But Dallin only sighed and replied that they did not know the exact reason. The only thing they knew for sure, they were last attacked without warning. Marius tried to discharge the tense atmosphere, joking that they all became obedient pupils of Annette, conquered by her force. Dallin denied this opinion, but Marius quickly explained that it was only a joke. Dallin looked at Marius in surprise and noted that he could still run, despite fatigue. Hearing the explanation of magical strengthening, he only wondered. Marius looked at the map that appeared in front of him and realized that they were surrounded. Turning to Dallin, he asked if they had a breakdown plan. But Dallin was silent. Meanwhile, in the camp of the pursuers of the captain of the 2nd Division, Gustav Schaudev, confidently stated that they knew about the hiding place of fugitives. He warned that if the girl was not voluntarily given, there would be serious consequences. His words sounded cold and contemptuous. Dallin suddenly grabbed Marius and called to the pursuers holding one of their dear inhabitants. He added that if they want to return it, let them come out and speak. Marius asked if it was a plan and doubted his effectiveness. But Dallin just waved his hand and ordered him not to worry. Meanwhile, Bennett and Ben looked around, noticed the scout that went to them. They immediately warned Dallin. He ordered them to leave, but the young man had already given a signal to his comrades to act immediately. One of the pursuers loudly exclaimed that they were ordinary civilian. But someone said, "What if he is a magician?" These words caused indecision among soldiers. Gustav remembered the orders he received from his master. He told him that he could not retreat, and that this time the girl would definitely not run away, unlike the previous time. After the whisper of one of the subordinates, Michael turned to Gustav and suggested that if he had to choose between the girl and the magician, then their priority is the magician. The greater the magician, the more valuable it is. Gustav asked his master if he had enough powerful magicians who serve him. However, it was not enough. Gustav thought it was just empty words. Meanwhile, Marius, returning to Dallin, told him that when he gave a signal, he would take action. Suddenly, one of the soldiers exclaimed that only magicians could wear such suffocating equipment. It made Gustav a moment to become neglected, because his people seemed unprepared for the situation. He was confused and did not understand what Dallin thought. He even asked if they planned to take it with them. Dallin resolutely replied that Marius was their best chance. He explained that he already speaks well and could easily adapt to the world of people. Gustav narrowed his eyes and asked what they would whisper. His voice was threatening. He warned that if they did not seem immediately, the consequences would be serious. Dallin, without paying attention to his threats, returned to Marius and pointed. They rushed forward without looking back. Marius was not a man who lives hatred, and his actions were always directed to the good. Therefore, using the magic of light, he created a blinding illusion to distract the pursuers. Blinded by an unexpected outbreak, the soldiers wiped their eyes without understanding what was happening. Marius felt relief, Annette and others were now safe. The pursuers fussed, complaining that they see nothing. Bennett returned to Dallin and asked if he really believed that everything would be so easy. Dallin replied that Marius told everything he needed fit and hoped that he would accept it. Then he added that in the end everything will happen properly. Meanwhile, Marius again used the attribute of light, applying a paralyzing spell that temporarily stunned enemies. He perceived it as a kind of fee for being destroyed. However, he hoped that he did not overdo it, and that none of the enemies received serious damage. He approached the soldiers and asked if everything was fine with them. Marius sat under a tree, biting the apple quietly when the captain of the pursuers began to get up, still swaying. The soldiers gradually came to their senses, and Marius asked once again if everything was fine with them. He suggested using healing magic, but Gustav, barely standing on his feet, asked to no longer use any abilities. He also noted that because of this they were behind Annette and its group. Marius just apologized. Gustav straightened, introduced himself as a captain of the Schneider family army who controlled these lands. He asked Marius's name. He hesitated. He introduced himself as he was called here, noticing that it did not cause any suspicion. Gustav, without expressing his emotions, accepted his words and hinted that he was hoping for fruitful cooperation. Then he announced to his people that they were returning to the estate with Marius. He hesitated whether he had to agree. Gustav helped Marius to sit on a horse, but when he feels his weight, he was surprised. "You are very easy," he said, asking whether he was eating right. Marius replied that he had lately ate fish and fruits. Marius decided that he first needed to gain their trust and gather as much information as possible. At the time, he hoped that Annette and others would be able to get to his destination safely. When they arrived at the estate, one of the soldiers knocked on the goal and announced that he wanted to meet with Lord of these lands. The gates opened, and they came to them a butterfly Schneider family. Their horseback ride lasted several hours, and finally the majestic mansion began to emerge in the distance. Marius looked at him. He was located far, surrounded by high walls. Gustav, meanwhile, reported Blono that he should report on the execution of the order. "The owner wants to meet with this person," Gustav added. Blono nodded and asked them to wait. When Marius entered the estate, he noticed how the girls closed the gate. Obviously, the maids worked here. It reminded him of typical anime scenes where such places looked very majestic. Blono led them to the owner of the estate. The lord cast his gaze on Gustav and immediately noticed that he again allowed the girl to escape. Gustav tilted his head and apologized. However, he stated that he brought someone else, a person who could be extremely useful for their lord. Lord, with a cold expression of the face, noted that he had repeatedly doubted Gustav's competence, and seemed right. Gustav agreed that his doubts were quite justified, but added that he could not believe his own failure. Lord stressed that Gustav gave clear instructions to bring the magician, but finding such people was not easy. However, instead, Gustav not only failed the mission, but also accused of everything he had to find. Marius realized that Gustav was unlikely to believe, so he decided to use the opportunity to penetrate the estate and find out why Lord was pursuing Annette and her friends. He made a step forward and thanked for the salvation. Lord looked at him, expressing his dissatisfaction. He disrespectfully hinted that this behavior is characteristic of stray dogs. Gustav tried to soften the situation, promising that Marius would be punished. Gustav quietly turned to Marius, ordering him to remain silent until he spoke. Then he returned to the Lord, and after a short pause, suggested a duel to test Marius. A little later, Gustav, holding his stomach, sighed that he was hungry terribly. Marius apologized for unexpectedly touched the topic, but he was unpleasant as he was one-sided with Gustav. He only shook his head and noted that Marius was still young. He thanked him for his support, but urged to be more careful, given the dissatisfaction of Lord. Marius promised to be careful next time. Marius decided to know more about his rival and asked Gustav. He apologized for the lack of details, explaining that the duel should show the real abilities of Marius after a long journey. He reported that his opponent would be a South, a personal magician of the Schneider family and one of the strongest magicians in the region. Yusep possessed the magic of the 7th level, and his strongest spell was the aqua splash of a water elemental. He could fight with 5 or 6 opponents at the same time and win. In addition, he had the skills of teleportation and usually managed a whole group of magicians. Marius realized that if the Yusep is so strong, then the sorcerer who tracked Annette and her group was unlikely to. Although there were different types of search magic, the most effective was the magic of tracking, the spell of the 6th rank, which allowed to find people at great distances. Giuseppe, appearing in front of them, looked at Gustav. "Weak dogs like you cannot even bark," he said, expressing contempt. He also added that he had heard of his recent failures and considered them shameful. Then he turned his gaze on Marius. "Is it the rural prodigy that Gustav was involved in this case?" he said mockingly. "He does not know his place and seek to become a duke?" They came to the space of the arena located on the territory of the Schneider estate. Giuseppe looked at Marius with his eyes, and noted that he did not even try to escape. "What can I praise you for bravery?" He wondered. Lord watched a duel without unnecessary protests, while Gustav stated that he would signal, and ordered Marius to stay alive, so that the opponents could not return and restore attacks. Gustav announced the beginning of a duel between Giuseppe and Marius, as Sepa decided to apply the power of water, hoping that an unexpected blow paralyzed Marius, and approached to check if he had left this effect powerless. Marius replied with a frantic counterattack, stunning the South and all present who did not expect such an unexpected turn of events. Giuseppe fell defenselessly on the ground, and everyone was amazed. The defeat came in an instant, and Marius realized that the private aristocrats were not as reliable as it seemed. As Spey stood up, swept, and realized that he became only an obstacle, the fire forced the sorcerer of the 7th rank to surrender and fall on his knees. Giuseppe used the magic of the 7th rank water, turning it into a powerful ball directed as Aqua Splash, is sure that Marius will not be able to withstand such a devastating attack. Seeing the water ball slowly approaching, Marius answered the magic of fire, which came together with the cold force of water with a bright flash. The fire, faced with water, directed irrevocably directly to Giuseppe, who could not believe his eyes when the flames swept his body. Finally, Giuseppe lay on the ground, defeated, and Gustav declared the victory of Marius in this intense battle. Marius is a talented red-haired magician, but inside, he remained a Ryuti, a high school student who was lost in a snowstorm during a training campaign of the climbing club, preferring virtual reality. At the table, everyone lifted glasses in honor of the victory of Marius over Giuseppe, sharing joy and discussing the incredible abilities of the magician that gave everyone strength and courage. Laris enjoyed the taste of salty meat after long days in the woods, when he had to be satisfied with what nature gave, remembering her friend and others who once was nearby. Marius thought it would be great if the day had come when Annette and her friends fled unharmed, without wounds and meetings with monsters. Suddenly, Gustav asked if he wanted to drink a little, and agreeing, Marius received a glass of grape juice instead of wine. Everyone discussed Giuseppe, who was mocking all, forcing others to be his partners in magical training. His arrogance was especially annoying the captain, and Gustav thought as Marius was able to defeat him with the help of a 12th level fire, while the technique of Giuseppe was much more perfect. Marius thought about how best to explain Gustav her point of view, and suddenly the idea came to his mind. He decided to compare the magician with culinary skills. Turning to the hostess, he asked for several eggs, a bowl, butter, and a casserole. The hostess looked at him in surprise, asking what he conceived. Marius just smiled and replied that he wanted to cook something simple. He poured oil into a frying pan and broke several eggs. He then used the magic of fire to fry the eggs. The mistress jokingly asked him not to burn her ham. Marius stirred the eggs thoroughly, controlling the temperature. A few minutes before them was a ready-made omelet. He showed 2 omelets, one prepared, and the other was a tavern chef. Then he asked the cook how many years he was engaged in cooking. The boss replied that for over 30 years. Marius nodded and acknowledged that he was a newcomer. In his country, the omelet was considered a basic dish that directly reflected the skills of the cook. In fact, it was not as easy as it seemed. He explained that fire, like cooking, needs experience. Even if the newcomer has power, he will not be able to fully implement it without practice. Silence has fallen into the ham. Marius hoped that his comparison would be clear. The chef confessed that he did not fully understand the magical metaphor, but still felt pride in his skill. Gustav, in turn, realized that today's match showed that Giuseppe, despite his rank, was only a novice cook in the world of magic. Gustav noted that Marius was talking about all this calmly, and asked if he would serve Lord as committed as a South. Marius replied that it depends on the will of Lord himself. They began to discuss that with such abilities it should be found with outstretched arms, but also warned not to repeat the mistakes of the Giuseppe, which became too arrogant. Marius laughed and said he promised nothing. Meanwhile, in the forest, Dylan approached the group and asked how the pursuers were. Annette, lying in Dallin's hands, apologized for their peaceful life in the house and that they had to run again. She felt a burden, especially because of the injured leg. However, Dallin and Ben just smiled, assuring her that she was not guilty. Dallin noted that although life in their hiding place was good, they were going to leave. They were lucky to have enough stocks. More than the lost house, he worried about Annette himself. Annan smiled gratefully. Suddenly Ben shouted that he saw the river. They noticed that the grass was soft and thick here, and Dallin did not feel the presence of monsters nearby. He suggested staying here for the night. The evening came. The crickets began to crickets in the grass. Annette asked if everything was fine with Marius. Dallin assured her that he would handle. Ellen explained that when the pursuers learned that Marius, the magician, their eyes lit up, because such a strong sorcerer was a valuable find for them. She added that if Marius does not like something, he will always be able to escape with magic. She then confessed that she first merged him for attacking Dallin and Ben, but now she saw that he was in fact a good person who even learned their language to understand them better. Ben and Dallin also felt that they found a real friend. Although Annette looked weak, she had great magical power. Ed wondered why people and monsters could not coexist peacefully, even if Marius, a man, was able to find common ground with them. Annette could not hold back tears. She confessed that she wanted to see Marius again, but she did not know if they would have such an opportunity. At night, the silence violated only the splash of water and the singing of the crickets. Annette, exhausted by escape and excitement, fell asleep with a strong sleep. Ben hoped that at least in her sleep she would be fine. Dallin sighed and said they would have to return to nomadic life again. He regretted that he could not persuade Annette. In a distant village, her magic was dangerous, and he had to predict that something like this would happen sooner or later. Marius suggested that if he had not met Annette, she could still live happily in the village. One of them expressed the idea that the most important is the well-being of Annette, so that she could finally live quietly and without worry. Dallin agreed, though he acknowledged that they have just met the person with whom they had just met. However, his heart was still hoping for Marius' support. Along with Michael, someone was thinking about their futility, at the same time imagining how Marius could become. Dallin, when he was engaged in fishing, smiled when the fish thanked him for his help. He remembered how much they survived, and noted that every night it brings a new dawn. Dallin noted that there are craters in the area, where the couple came from. Thanks to them, they managed to cook fish. Dolan added that luck is still on their side, and the sky is merciful, which gives hope. Ben, hearing these sweet words, smiled, and said that if Dallin starts to speak so, it is a sign of safety. Dallin vigorously gave Ben lapis, noting that he was fully immersed in food, and joked that maybe Ben would soon be on a water diet. Ben shouted in response that he was cruelly, and asked why he should suffer for Dolan, announcing that he should do without food from now on. The old quarrel began as in ancient times, but smiles were reminiscent of past times when the travels were light and fun. Dallin supported these jokes, adding that they have long been traveling from place to place, spending the night where they can. Looking at the starry sky, Ben remembered how Marius once attacked them with his fiery spell, which was really hurt. Ed expressed interest in the strange diet of Marius, and Ben suggested that, given his strength and friendliness, he was probably comfortable. He talked about the tastes of the city, and was interested in what dishes were cooked in the area. Then, they agreed that Annette was the most energy of all three. Meanwhile, a breakfast was served at the Marius Schneider Hotel. Despite the terrible taste of broth and brick bread, he realized that it was not necessary to complain. Last night, Marius and Gustav arrived in the tavern. Gustav suggested staying there for the night and promised to pay the accommodation. In the room, Marius saw only ruins. He thought that if he had money, he would choose the best hotel. Missing the delicious food he had once eaten, he remembered fried fish and potatoes made by his own. Great moments that were reminiscent of how far they went. In the morning, Marius left the courtyard, and, without planning it at first, decided to go to the castle. Marius reflects on the strange location of the castle. Unlike the typical feudal palaces in the center of cities, this was hidden in the forest, invisible from the city landscape. He made sure yesterday. It seemed that the mansion just appeared in the middle of the forest. He was soon approached by a representative who reported that he would be accompanied by a carriage to the estate. Marius expressed gratitude and thought that today's reception is much different from yesterday. Blono noted that the Lord was extremely merciful and decided that Marius deserved a better acceptance, given his position. He jokingly noted that perhaps a court magician is socially higher than the butter, although the pressure does not rest. Bluno approached the Lord and announced that Marius had arrived. The Lord noted that yesterday Marius proved himself quite well, so he instructed him the first task, to destroy several monsters. At this time, Pedro sat silently opposite, watching everything carefully. Marius tensed when Pedra suddenly appeared. He could not understand who she was and why she was not yesterday. Pedra smiled, praising him for yesterday's victory over Husep, but in Marius's head the question appeared. Why did she sound so familiar? Did she saw the battle and where she was yesterday? The most important thing. He felt the danger penetrates his bones. After that, Pedro gently stroked the Lord on his head, and then returned to Marius, assuring him that after his speech, she was convinced that he would become the perfect magician. According to Michael, the Lord ordered Marius to collect 5 satellites and go to the Vauda forest to destroy any monsters that would happen. Despite the fact that Marius knew little about the mysterious Pedro, her presence of the moon was heard in his ears even far from the estate. He felt that this woman was an extraordinary personality, so he decided to remain alert. Having collected the satellites, he announced that all the preparations were finally completed, and they are ready to go on. Carrie presented his satellites, Jajma, Viceni, Rushan, and Miko. Marius replied politely, expressing his joy that was familiar with everyone. Hearing that the case was completed, Bloon noted that it was time to go. Marius thanked him for his help. Carrie suddenly remembered the duel and exclamedly shouted that he saw Marius in battle. Struck by his skill, Carrie wondered how many magical spells Marius knew, hinted that he did not show all his capabilities. Marius hesitated, realizing what they expected. In the end, he acknowledged that he has a 3rd-level magic and can control water, fire, light, and electricity. In addition, he has good healing and support skills. Hearing this, everyone was amazed. Carrie did not hide his admiration. To own the 3rd-level magic is how to be a superhero. Others agreed that it would be much easier for them to fight the monsters with such a magician. Jahim remembered rumors of universal magic, and talked about that with such force, they would be able to win a magical festival. But Marius decided not to reveal all his abilities, so as not to cause unnecessary suspicion. He easily overcome the 7-level incineration that confirmed that his true force clearly exceeds the 3rd level. However, hiding their capabilities, Marius was aware that even in this case it would be useful in the front line. Carrie reported that they were being sent to destroy the goblin detachment on the outskirts of Vajud. Hearing this, Marius sighed with relief. To fight the goblins is much easier than with orcs or paving stones. Carrie explained Marius that they were worried about a strange phenomenon. Monsters cannot mate in the center of the forest. Despite numerous attempts, they seem to encounter an invisible obstacle, forced to stay on its outskirts. Carrie suggested that the cause could be in a powerful creature, perhaps a dragon, or some power of destruction that monsters try to avoid. Marius thought, the presence of the dragon could explain the fear of monsters. From the game he knew that the dragons were the top of the food chain, the unprecedented powerful creatures. Even a small dragon is able to defeat a detachment of warriors without a chance to win. Before meeting with Annette and her friends, Marius never thought about such things. But now, becoming part of this world, I realize that the coexistence of people and monsters has its risks. He reflected whether this problem was characteristic only of this kingdom, whether such a situation is everywhere. They stopped at the entrance to the wood forest. There were 6 pieces of mucus on the ground. Marius noted that they had to go to the goblins, but Nico explained, goblins are probably busy with marriage games, so it is worth finding out why the mucus is mastered here. Carrie suggested that the cause could be in the swamp. However, there was no swamp near, just a river. Marius wondered, mucus usually multiply in water, so it looked strange. They began to watch the creatures closely. Suddenly, the mucus made a double jump, a signal to the attack. Carrie warned that their blows were painful, and physical attacks were ineffective. He suggested Marius to take it. Marius used the magic of fire, and mucus was instantly evaporated. Everyone was surprised. They knew that it would happen, but they did not expect a weak fire to destroy creatures from one blow. Jahim noted that if Giuseppe tried it, he would need a separate spell on everyone. Marius reflexively caused a fire, one of its elements, and without thinking, released a powerful flame when the group was preparing for battle. Remembering, he apologized to his comrades, recognizing that his reflexes had worked faster than his mind. However, Carrie just smiled. The task was accomplished, and they could continue the way. But Marius felt the need to at least partially pay the Lord for his help, although he did not consider him to be debt. Washina understood his position. Money and status for him were not the main one. Carrie noted that the next mating of the monsters will take place in only 10 days and suggested to finish the case. Marius was surprised. Even the monsters have a clear schedule? He asked why goblins did not leave the forest. Carrie suggested that there may be some changes in the environment and suggested that the issue consider. Yahim noted that any new information could be useful. Marius suddenly realized that they could not use magic, and realized that he was waiting for action. Carrie asked if Marius's duties as a magician. Someone noted that although Marius and powerful, but never held high positions. He agreed, recognizing that he still trained only on his own in the forest. After focusing, Marius caused the disaster strength and used sensual magic. A mysterious map appeared in front of him, which clearly showed a huge concentration of energy in the center. It was an alarming sign to decipher. Marius was surprised. Its magical sensitivity usually allowed to recognize the thinnest energy flows, but this clot was too massive and unusually powerful. He was not on his own. He suggested that it could be a dragon or other extremely strong creature. The comrades noticed his reaction and worriedly asked if something was able to find out. Marius replied that he was not sure, but there were no enemies. He was thinking about possible threats. He even thought it could be a demon. But in this case, would weaker creatures be able to exist in this place? He suggested returning and talking to someone who knows the forest well. Carrie agreed and noted that they needed a Giuseppe, who considered themselves an enlightener and could answer their questions. Marius just smiled. When they met the Lord, he demanded the evidence of their feats. Marius has confusedly acknowledged that he has no trophies. He remembered the words of Kari that such testimony may be needed. The Lord was surprised that Marius destroyed all the goblins, but did not take any prisoners. His face was rushed, and he suspected the boy of cruelty. Marius hesitated, realizing that a person who lives in luxury and hardly needed weak hostages. Pedra intervened in the conversation, assuring that there is nothing extraordinary here. She praised Marius, calling him a prominent young magician, who was able to defeat Giuseppe with only one spell. She emphasized that after meeting with Mucus and goblins, only ashes remained from them. She then turned to Marius to confirm her words. Marius was not confident in the true intentions of Pedra. Her words seemed compliment, but could hide the provocation. However, suddenly the Lord made a decision. He allowed Marius to go by handing the bag with gold. After that, he ordered the boy to remain a devoted servant in the future, hinting at his future role. Leaving the mansion, Marius thought about how to use the money received to improve their living conditions. But his reflection was interrupted by Carrie, who reported the emergency. There was a tense silence. Marius looked at Brown, waiting for explanations. He followed him to the garden where panic voices were heard. Marius realized someone was injured during the last surgery. Carrie immediately ordered everyone to disperse, stating that Marius himself would accompany. When they approached, Sakim, seeing Marius, exhaled lightly. He recalled that he had previously mentioned his skills in the magic of healing. Hearing this, Marius immediately asked what had happened. Carrie explained that several people were seriously injured during the battle with monsters. Marius felt a thick smell of blood squeezing his chest. He was not a doctor, but hoped that his magic healing would help save the victims. On the ground, Gustav sat, supporting the head of the wounded, whose fingers flowed blood. His face was tense, the voice trembling when he declared the terrible news. Giuseppe and Leon dead. Hearing this, everyone was frozen, and a depressing silence hanged over the battlefield. Marius could not believe heard. His first reaction was to think that it was a bad joke. Although he was not close to Leon, Giuseppe knew well. In the arms of Gustav lay Amos, with whom they joked together yesterday. Amos could barely whisper that they had a good lingering. But I am glad that Marius remained unharmed. Marius gently asked him to keep his strength and not speak. Suddenly he noticed that Amos had no longer left hand. In his head, the idea went, will he be able to restore the lost organ with the help of his magic? But immediately there was a questionable question. How do others respond to it? In the game, his gift of healing had no limits. But here he understood that excessive intervention could only aggravate the situation. Amos was on the verge of life and death. Any mistake could become fatal. Having made the decision, Marius decided to focus on the main thing. Stop bleeding, close the wound, and restore blood loss. The rest was already dependent on fate. Breathing deeply, he activated his healing magic. Amos felt the pain gradually subsided and the bleeding stopped. It became easier for him to breathe. The forces began to return. He whispered with surprise that he could not believe in his own salvation and expressed his deep gratitude to Marius. A dead silence reigned around, which suddenly broke through the passionate exclamations and applause. Marius's act caused genuine admiration among those present. Gustav thanked Marius for the saved life of a friend, assuring that everything will be fine now. Marius himself perceived gratitude with modesty, only rejoicing that he could help. Amos, referring to Gustav, emphasized that Marius's modesty is one of his most valuable advantages. Amos sighed and quietly said that he was sorry for the death of Giuseppe and Leon. But Gustav replied that despite the pain, he was glad that Amos managed to survive. Others agreed that his salvation was worth the celebration. Marius thought, in this world, it is impossible to simply classify people as strong or weak. Everyone has their own fears, hopes, and value. He expressed his interest in what happened to Giuseppe. Amos, understanding his feelings, suggested talking about it later when it became a little easier. He acknowledged that his emotions were too strong now, and he wanted to discuss it in a calmer environment. Marius nodded and apologized for his perseverance, realizing that the conversation would now be inappropriate. Anyone who could have helped to care for the dead and visit the church for dawn. Marius agreed to participate in the ceremony. Gustav instructed him this task, explaining that he should stay with Amos. They agreed to meet in the evening to discuss further actions. Marius thought about the transience of human life. Yesterday, he fought with Giuseppe, and today, he is no longer alive. It reminded him of how sharply everything could change. Although they did not always agree with each other, he regretted that he did not spend more time with Giuseppe, discussing the magic and nature of the forest. His reflections interrupted Gustav, reminding that in their world, even in the mountain, you need to find the strength to smile. Such a life of warriors. Marius agreed with him, although Gustav clearly stirred alcohol, which caused him a slight annoyance. Feeling that he needed fresh air, he decided to move away. Gustav, however, ordered Amos to stop eating, but he just smiled and stated that he needed to eat well now to recover faster. Marius was pleasantly surprised to see that Amos's appetite was recovering and sincerely advised for him. He apologized and carefully asked if his hand would be a big problem for him. Amos waved, noting that there was nothing to apologize for. Marius saved his life. He jokingly added that Marius should take a little to take the arrogance of Giuseppe. In addition, even with one hand he will be able to have a rapier well, so it will not be a big problem in battle. Amos acknowledged that he would need some training to feel confident again. Then he suddenly remembered that Marius would not hurt to work. The attendees were surprised to learn that he could not ride. Marius acknowledged that there was no point in denying. Gustav noted that although his magic is perfect, he also has weaknesses. One of the boys smiled and added that horses are a scream that can only be rich, while ordinary people walk on foot. Gustav suggested that perhaps Marius was just flying, so he doesn't need a horse. Amos finally said that their group was ambushed by orcs, which united with the goblins. At first, they noticed only 5 goblins and decided to divide the task. 4 entered the melee, and Giuseppe supported them with magic. But everything went out of the plan. The ambush came out 2 orcs. This and South and Yusef were killed first. The battle with the orc was cruel and chaotic, leaving behind only pain and loss. Amos, who was left without a hand, was painfully aware of their defeat. The victory over the goblins was a difficult lesson. They were not ready for a real threat. Marius felt disappointing the weakness of her comrades, but also understood that without his magic, the situation could be even worse. The boys, selected by Amos, announced the vengeance of Orc and offered to open hunting. Marius understood the thirst for retribution, but doubted whether everyone should attract, because some orcs could be worthy despite stereotypes. However, the general consensus that the orcs, the savages, Marius realized that his submerged thoughts pulled him too deep into doubt. Carrie suggested that he immediately prepare to support the team. I am sure that there are neither 10 nor 20 enemies next to Marius. They fought to the last, teaching opponents of wisdom, so that they would not be dug again. Marius appreciated the cohesion and care of his comrades, but knew that excessive emotion could lead to problems. Suddenly, he was interested in why do the monsters avoid the center of Les Feux and mucus refuse to mate in water? Gustave apologized, acknowledging that their knowledge of Les Voûtes was not enough. He suggested that the South could know something. Marius mentioned the magicians from the mansion who went to the forest with the mission of submission, and Gustave suggested tomorrow to contact the Noi for answers. Marius thanked Gustave for his advice and agreed with her. They decided to postpone sad conversations and go to drink to relax a little. Noticing that Gustave was dorming, Marius, using the magic of physical strengthening, lifted him on his shoulders and took it to the tavern. There, the hostess offered him the best room and delicious food. The next morning, Marius woke up with a heavy heart, unable to believe in the words that he brought them. Blowbutt repeated the shocking news. Amos died. Marius could not believe. Yesterday Amos seemed completely healthy. He wondered if his magical ability could influence this case, although the healing spell was perfect. Blowbutt assured that Marius' error was missing. Surprised, Marius heard that he knew his thoughts. He explained. Amos fell from the horse, breaking his neck, and death came instantly. The loss of the hand seriously interfered with normal activity, and despite the morning training, efforts were in vain. Marius asked if he saw this case, but he replied that it was only an assumption. He added that the death of Amos was extremely sad, and that each of them fate once to die. Marius, as a young warrior, was not fully aware of this truth, but he emphasized, death is an integral part of life. Then his voice died when someone called him. Marius confessed Gustave that he heard about the tragedy with Amos. Gustave apologized, reminding that Marius had once saved him. He added that Amos was always hard, working, and perhaps a curse fell on him. Marius realized that his decision could be false, because he did not take into account how difficult it would be to live without a hand, especially when his life depends on hunting for monsters. Marius realized that he had treated the situation too lightly. He realized that he could return Amos if he used a strong spell, but hid his true magical abilities. This decision was a fatal obstacle, and it could not give any excuses. Gustave asked what made Marius so surprised, and whether he considers himself guilty of Amos's death. Marius was silent, agreeing with that. Gustave assured him that the spell was perfect, so one should not blame himself. But Marius insisted that the first level of the first level could turn his Amos his hand, and the tragedy could be avoided. Gustave was scattered, accusing Marius of self-righteousness, and ordered not to think about what had passed, because time did not return. Gustave noted that his words could offend Amos, because he ordered Marius to take himself before returning. Pedra suddenly appeared and, noticing the expression of horror on Marius's face, advised to go home, hinting that the day was extremely difficult. She also mentioned that it was a gift from Michael. He was strictly ordered to go home because of a bad condition, warning that he was only in trouble. Marius went silently without looking back even when Gustave shouted, trying to hold him. You came to Marius, calling him to go out, and Carrie stressed that it was time to move on. He reported a new mission and suggested that Marius join. He sat silently on the bed, immersed in his thoughts. Honor thanked Carrie for the care of Marius, and he said that the guy even barks with the captain, so he gradually returns to his usual state. Lying in the room, Marius comprehended everything that had happened. Amos's death has awakened in him the feelings he had not yet known. It's been 3 days. Amos is gone, and his death was unexpected. In his familiar world, such seemed impossible. Good food and comfort of the tavern brought him peace. He was glad to change the situation and the opportunity to just relax. The girl who served him was noticed how he relaxed. She talked to him, and Marius realized that he had been alone for too long. His attention was attracted by an artist who demonstrated amazing skill with a huge sword. He promised to show a giant that absorbs the sword. Marius watched with interest how he cut bread with amazing accuracy. The artist thanked the guy who treated him and suggested to cook garlic croutons. The audience kept breathing when the artist plunged his sword in his throat, pulled him out, and remained unharmed. Marius looked puzzled, and the crowd exploded with applause. He did not feel any trace of magic and asked how he did it. The artist only smiled mysteriously, saying that it was a secret. The speech really raised Marius. After several performances, he returned to the hotel. The girl asked about his impression. He confirmed that the atmosphere was wonderful. She agreed that such moments of joy rarely happen. Marius wondered if high taxes were related to the fight against the monsters. The girl explained that the problem was not in this. Lord was once honest, but after meeting with a mysterious woman began to collect magicians, to spend money on strange research. Marius immediately guessed that it was about Pedra. The girl added that before her appearance, taxes were not a problem. Lord had a family son, but everything changed about 3 years ago. She apologized to the conversation about it and asked to keep everything secret. Later, lying in bed, Marius wondered, perhaps Pedra really manipulates Lord. Marius wondered how Pedra could influence the Lord. Was she a magician or even a demon? However, 3 years of planning were forced to doubt the latter. Carrie and Joachim came to the tavern for Marius, but found out that he had already left. Carrie noted that he did not even prevent them, but it seems better, and that was the main thing. The girl noted that Marius had good friends and wished him success. Meanwhile, Marius asked Bruno if they were going to a regular room, but he replied that he received an order from the owner and was leading him to another place. When he entered, he saw Pedra, who, sitting on the throne, invited him to his laboratory. The atmosphere of the room caused him mixed feelings. The feeling of anxiety only grew. The servant reported that he could not go further. Marius caught a strange smell and alert. Pedra invited him closer. She asked how he felt, adding that she was worried as if he were ill. Marius did not understand her true motives, but each of her words sounded suspiciously. He suddenly realized that his natural resistance to magic worked. Pedra used a voice spell. In the game, it did not work on him. Now he understood the mechanics of this effect. In order not to cause suspicion, he decided to pretend to be fascinated. She proposed to introduce him to the magicians who studied the divination here. Marius realized that they were used to find criminals. Pedra hinted with one little girl, and when Marius replied that she did not look like a villain, Pedra suggested that he could be cheated. She explained that this girl could talk to the monsters and conquer them. Such power could destroy the whole country if used in war. She then suggested Marius to demonstrate her skills and gave him a glass for divination. He realized that the process involves mixing herbs and other ingredients. The problem was that he did not know the components that used here. This is either a difference from the game, or they had a different approach. He explained Pedri that the ingredients were unfamiliar to him, and she suggested that he cite. She caused a magical vision, and a map of the world appeared in front of him. She then suggested that you mix the blue and green elixir, explaining that it was necessary to do it carefully. Finally, Pedra spoke about the catalyst, the longest eyeballs. She behaved as if they were animal organs, but they looked different. When Marius asked if it was human eyes, she confirmed. She explained that animals were once used, but she found a more effective way. Marius realized that Pedra has no moral boundaries in his experiments. He asked about the spell of the trail and wondered if it worked. Pedra was surprised by his awareness and explained that their magicians were limited to the use of powerful magic, so they found an alternative method. She hoped that Marius would help you find the desired place. He tried to use the spell several times, but did not find any trace of the network. The magic of divination could help, but he knew that the searches were taking time. Pedra gathered around her magicians and hunters for monsters, controlling them. Marius did not understand what purpose she wanted. She approached the window. Her presence filled the room. Touching Marius, she noted that the night looks especially beautiful. He felt tension because of her unexpected appearance. She ordered not to make nonsense. Pedra hinted that a man and a woman usually remain alone for one purpose. Her words were anxious. He realized that he should go, otherwise he was at risk of losing himself. She stated that one of her words was enough for anyone to become loyal to her. But Marius resisted. She applied magic to full power, and his consciousness began to blur. Pedra was fascinated by his resilience. In the morning, he woke up to see scattered clothes, the evidence of events last night. Memories were vividly fluttering in his head. He understood that even in spite of resistance, he did not remain indifferent. The feeling that Annette and others are moving away did not give him rest. He wanted to clean himself, so he went to the bath. Later, Pedra wondered how he slept. He thanked and she with a wicked smile noticed that he was wonderful last night. Marius proposed to return to work. The magicians looked like in a trance, while the dukes kept consciousness. He was alerted by a strange smell of flowers in the center of the room. He has already seen these plants before. Suddenly, one of the magicians announced that the spell had taken place. Pedra looked at him with surprise, and the magician confirmed that they managed to find the location of enemies. Marius was stunned. The enemy was discovered, and it seems like a girl. Meanwhile, Dallin and Ben were watching the stars. Annette was concerned about whether they came too close to the city, but Dallin reassured her, explaining that they would not notice them. He suggested avoiding fire at night and moving to dawn so as not to attract attention. They had supplies, including special treats, dried potatoes. Ben joked about the benefits of sweets for a tired body, while the grid replied that the apartments were the embodiment of justice. Dallin listened to them silently, and then spoke. He suggested moving to the center of the plains, explaining that, although the path is long, but the forest could be more dangerous. However, this will break away from the pursuers. Annette asked what would happen if they were grabbed on the plain. Dallin acknowledged that there was little chance against the riders, but he wanted them to understand one thing. He noted that the pursuers retreated every time when they entered the forest. Ben suggested that it was because of their incompetence in forest conditions. Nolan added that the forest can teach them a lot. While they are there, they are unlikely to be able to grab. Donovan was usually silent, but this time he admitted that he had a bad premonition. Annette supported Dallin, encouraging him. She reminded that it was his instincts that helped them go so far. Everyone agreed with her, confirming that they trust his decision. It was decided that, given the complexity of the plan, it is worth sleeping well. Ben asked if he was sleeping. He replied that no, and asked if the enemy was close. Dallin denied and confessed that he was glad to see Anitus calm. He noted that if everything goes, they can still be pursued for another month. But they have always been able to escape. Dallin was concerned that the pursuers were playing with them, but now decided to act seriously. Ben thanked Marius for his help in escape. They did not know where they were moving, but the situation was better than before. Dallin agreed, noting that everything could change. Ben suggested that they needed a strong magician. Don believed that the pursuers could have such a magician to capture the net. Ben acknowledged that he knew little about magic, but emphasized that the magician capable of controlling the mind could change the course of events. At the same time, he worried that the same magician could be used against them. He assured Dallin that remains the same Ben he respects. Suddenly, he stated that he was ready for everything for her safety. With common determination, they were preparing to fight for the chance to cross the plains. Pedra watched their boldness mixed with despair. Marius noticed her peace. She noted that the enemy is far away, but if you go immediately, you can catch up with it by the evening. Unexpected, Pedra ordered Marius to stay and take responsibility for the situation. Marius was stunned by her. Pedra explained that she plans to bring all the soldiers and magicians to head the campaign. Any objection could be suspected, so he had to act carefully. Pedra, satisfied with Marius's behavior, stated that she liked such obedient guys. She ordered not to spend time and announced that the gathering at the gate would be in an hour. He realized that it was a test of his abilities. He activated the magic barrier around the castle, believing that this would be enough to protect. The owner of the castle remained in the shade, but still had an impact. In the game, he had a lot of equipment, including the rings of the divine language, which allowed him to sing for a long time without loss of power. Meanwhile, Pedra and her subordinates went in search of a grid. Finally, they found the children's hiding place. The views were directed to the plains of Katie. Pedra decided to wait for the sunset so as not to attract attention and give the horses to rest. When the time came, she turned to Rubens, ordered to act. Dolan, without waiting for obstacles, faced a deep abyss. The bypass would take too long. They fell into the trap. The pursuers hidden smell and drowned. Annette shouted to Dallin because there was another gap ahead. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, Pedra appeared in front of them, smiling. She expressed joy from the meeting. Smiling, she congratulated Annette, but Dallin asked to let her go, assuring that she only wanted to talk. Annette asked why they were persecuted. Pedra said she was only interested in her. These words shocked Dallin, Ben, and Annette. She felt the cold, and tears rolled on her cheeks. Dallin realized that they were only a cover. They begged for a peaceful life and promised not to create problems, but the persecution did not stop. Pedra mentioned the case of 2 years ago when Annette was sinking in the river. She explained that it usually avoids the use of magic, but then it was a question of life and death. She stated that the incident proved the reality of Annette's abilities. Hearing this, the girl was puzzled, not understanding why she is forced to believe something. Dallin thought that they could not kill or capture the S-Dragon, and therefore the whole situation seemed meaningless. Looking at Pedra in the eye, Annette whispered softly that it was a lie. She realized that if she goes with them, her friends would die. Pedra smiled and acknowledged that Annette was right, adding that she was very sorry. Ben screamed, demanding that Annette retreat. He insisted that they could no longer fight and should appear. Dallin supported him, saying that they could be killed. Annette said she would be their defender this time. She turned to the monsters, calling them to come to her call and share her strength. Her voice echoed in the hearts of the monster around. The earth began to tremble, attracting general attention. Pedra ordered her people to keep calm and keep the system, but suddenly Dallin signaled Annette. Hearing his call, the monsters were already nearby, ready to answer. The Pedra army was shocked when worms, hypogrings, and other creatures appeared. They have never seen that force before. Looking at the monsters, Annette noticed that many of them responded to her call. She screamed that they only wanted a peaceful life, and begged the detachment to stop. Gustav addressed Pedra, asking if she was so amazed at the events that had lost his mind. He understood that their forces would not compare with such a powerful army. Pedra only sighed and stated that the last 2 years have been the longest and most difficult for her. Pedra stated that all her efforts were aimed at strengthening the magical power for the sake of Reuben herself. She confessed that she was tired of the endless absorption of weak souls for her own power. She stroked the spirit flew to her and wondered if Annette could do something else to balance the situation. Annette saw with horror how her friends were turning into puppets under the control of POWR. Ben suddenly realized the danger. The coil froze, struck by what is happening, and Pedra just smiled, satisfied with her influence. Dallin was stunned by her methods. Suddenly Marius flew into the air, releasing a powerful lightning strike that stunned the enemies. Annette instinctively pressed Dallin. Her gaze was full of admiration when she looked at Marius. Pedra only smiled gently, stating that she made him wait. She returned to Marius and asked if she guessed what she was about to say. All parts of her plan were on the ground. Marius noticed that she had not suffered stunned. She announced that everything, by working out her toys and monsters, have to prepare for death. Marius stated that Pedra was dreaming and that her plan would not work because he would be on her way. Ben was surprised that she seems to have lost control. Pedra screamed hysterically, accusing everyone that they did not understand her great goal. Marius noticed how her lower body began to turn into roots. He realized that Pedra, demon, had a mortal demon. In the game, Marius has repeatedly fought with demons. They were fast and cruel. He realized that he should be vigilant. Pedra just smiled and said she was sorry. The representative of Rubina herself assured that she did not want it. But it is too late. Pedra screamed that they would not stop her, even if they pulled out with the roots. She promised to destroy everyone. The fairies were mischievously circled in the grass, hinting at the use of transmission magic. Pedra suddenly realized that her voice disappeared, and the spell was removed. Marius' magic created a vacuum that neutralized her abilities. She decided to use the magic of the second-level fire for the explosion, but realized that she did not correct it with a normal cry. She was surprised how Marius was able to combine the cancellation of magic even in the lack of oxygen. He noted that the Arlite roots were rapidly regenerating, and just to tear it out. So I decided to act differently. To see the victory, he decided to burn Pedro. At such moments he lacked a health indicator, as in the game. Vacuum magic scattered, and everyone rushed to greet Marius. Arius supported Annette, asking how she feels. She thanked. Ben noted that although Marius is a good man, it will be difficult to deal with him now. Tarius analyzed the situation and confirmed that the Demez was suffocated. Dallin suggested that the demon S was unable to survive due to the vacuum. They realized that this demon had many human traits. Marius agreed. He gladly stated that she was happy to return. Ben noted that they were still good friends with Dallin, and he acknowledged that he was not so strong. Dallin acknowledged his mistake and regretted Marius to the enemy, although he considered it the best solution at the time. Marius assured that he had no anger. He noted that Lord and his soldiers were simply used. Annette, knowing this, suggested returning home without explaining directly, but hinting that staying here makes no sense. Ben noted that Annette was too good even for those who tried to kill them. Dallin joked that she was behaving so much because she fell in love. Ben asked Marius if he could move a large number of people to a specific place. He smiled and confirmed that it was possible. Annette said goodbye to the monsters who began to diverge. In a moment, All four were already in front of Bluno, who met them. They were asked there what they planned to do next. Dallin suggested that he could return to the forest, but Marius suddenly offered to go to the city, which surprised everyone. 2 days ago, they were in the thickets of the forest, where Lord's power seemed distant and unattainable. Now Marius explained that they had the opportunity to move forward. Annette reminded Marius that she was still a fugitive, and noted that they with the boys had a good understanding of the forest. They were quite enough, and there was no reason to complain. Marius explained that Dallin and Ben could mask, changing their appearance with magic. Dallin was surprised, but acknowledged that it was the perfect moment for such masking. He added that there was still enough information about the demons and their organization, so Pedra could have been quietly existing in the shadows all these years. Marius spoke about life in cities, remembering delicious food, from rostambiff to a fragrant fish soup. He knew that this transition would be difficult for the boys. Ben was caught by the idea of trying the city cuisine, but suspected that Marius had other reasons for this trip. He confessed that when communicating with ordinary people, he had a desire to live in a world where there was no enmity between people and monsters. Dallin and Ben agreed to go to the city. Ben proposed to use illusions to mask. Marius's magic changed their appearance instantly, making people look. Annette looked at them carefully and felt a strange excitement. They looked like people, but still remained inside. Ben noted that although he changed, he feels the same. Dallin asked how long the illusion would last. Marius explained that until the spell was improved, the effect will not last longer than a day. Annette touched Ben and noted that his skin is soft, but the texture is still different from human. Marius praised Ben for endurance and offered to relax tomorrow. They decided to spend the night in the forest, which now seemed safe. In a dream, Marius heard a familiar song, feeling a wave of nostalgia. Waking up, he saw Annette, who wished him a good morning and reported that the breakfast was almost ready. He remembered how they once sang in the cave and smiled. Ben and Dallin suddenly appeared, bringing water. Dallin, seeing his reflection in the river, confessed that he was surprised by his new look. After breakfast, Ben gladly noted that this time they did not need to hurry anywhere. He enjoyed the sunny weather. Marius agreed, emphasizing that the victory over Pedra is just a beginning. There are many more events ahead. Ben decided to take a little nap, and Marius suggested that he first washed, hinting that the smell after long travels was already quite noticeable. Dallin suggested that you swim in the river nearby, and Ben took up the washing of clothes. Annette also decided to join. Marius suddenly realized that since Ben and Dallin now look like people, they cannot swim in the river open. He hurried there, but saw that they had already dived into the water without worrying too much. After bathing, they gathered by the fire to warm up and relax. It passed almost all day, but the masking spell remained stable. Dallin confessed that he was still not used to his new look. The next day they stood at the gate of the city. People discussed rumors about the prosperous economy of this place. The gates opened, and they entered the city of destruction. They were struck by the number of people on the streets that filled the city with life. They sat down at the tables, trying new dishes. Ben and Annette were enthusiastically tasted fish bread, which was never seen before. The passers-by asked Ben and Annette to release the passage. She whispered that no one had recognized him. Ben sighed with relief and thanked Marius for magic. They realized that they were in a true human city. Even one day here seemed unrealistic. Marius noticed that Annette was crying. She said she was like a dream, but her heart suggested another. She said they would always be together. He was moved by her words. He thanked Annette and said he believed in the coexistence of people and monsters. Then he suggested that the information collect information. She agreed, apologizing for emotions. At first, they needed to find a place for the night. Marius was fond of how they trust each other. He suggested that they explore the city, although he understood that they would have to find affordable housing. Suddenly he noticed the announcement. Annette and Ben talked to a woman who offered them food. Dallin and Marius, watching, found it very sweet. Annette was embarrassed, but could not refuse, because she knew how valuable the food was. They tasted the dish with surprise, pleasing its taste. Marius stretched out a woman with a gold coin, asking if she could pay her. She was surprised, because it was a large amount, but agreed and gave him the rest. Marius asked Dallin if he would join them. He agreed, though he felt easy excitement. Thanks to the woman, they asked about cheap check-in. She kindly pointed the way for them. The woman explained that they needed to climb a slope where they would see a stone near a new store. She added that the benchmark would be a vibrant sign depicting a crescent near the blacksmith's workshop. Arriving in the Blue Crescent, they went inside. Marius learned that the night costs 3,000 fools. Not very expensive, but they were offered only one room for 4. He asked Annette whether she did not mind to share the space with them, to which she gladly agreed, saying that she was feeling safe with them. The room had only 2 beds. The girl from the hotel left them a flashlight, which could be rented for 50 coins, and reported that in the morning she would prepare lunch in the yard. Dallin opened the window and was impressed. The species resembled a forest that seemed like a successful choice. Dallin noted that the exit below leads to the dining room and the main entrance, and he wondered if he could jump out of there with Annette in the case of danger. Marius assured that they would be able to hide in the thickets. Annette noticed that visitors were already leaving the tavern, and offered to relax before going down. Going into the city, Marius decided to deal with money. The main currency here was diru, which resembled Japanese yen. 1 golden piece was 10,000 fools, a square silver coin, 1,000 fools, round silver, 100 fool. He calculated his finances: 15 gold coins, 6 square silver, and 68 round silver, which was 162,000 fools. This was not enough for the trip. He said they urgently needed a source of income. Annette remembered that she planned to buy something for herself. Marius noted that gradually begins to understand the local economy better. He said that a woman with chicken kebabs was able to exchange his golden coin for silver. Ben proposed to sell dried fish, but Marius explained that they had little product to open an outlet. It would be too expensive. He wondered how much life costs in the human city. They decided to look for a job by heading to one of the city areas. As in the game, they needed to go through the stone passage. Inside, they saw people sitting at the tables using barrels instead of chairs. Feeling tension, Marius reminded himself of keeping peace. In such places, the main thing is not to stand out. He approached the counter and ordered the sake. His request remained unanswered, so he repeated louder. But suddenly one of the visitors at the table interrupted him, pulling his dagger. The atmosphere resembled an old restaurant in Kyoto. The guy sitting at the table grabbed Annette by his hand and stated that she was exceptional, offering to join him. Dallin intervened instantly, grabbing the guy by the hand and warning that he would not touch her. Marius quickly intervened, reassuring Dallin and convincing him to release the boy. He was bent at the pain, claiming that his hand was broken and demanded to call a healer. Marius used the magic of diagnosis and found a fracture in the boy. Quickly using the magic of healing, he healed his hand. The guy shouted from unexpected treatment. He warned the guy that this time he was condescending, but if he touches Annette again, the consequences could be unpredictable. The owner of the institution recognized their strength and asked if they had financial difficulties. When Marius confirmed that he was looking for a job, he told about possible tasks. There were currently 3 requests: harvesting herbs, destroying a lake snake, and hunting a griffin. Annette became interested in herbs. Dallin, a monster on the monster. The owner warned that no one has dared on the griffin. The reward was appropriate: 30,000 for herbs, 800,000 per serpent, and 20 million per griffin. It shocked everyone. Anita strongly stated that they would take the griffin because she could not sit out of business. Everyone laughed, impressed with her courage. The owner suggested that she drink, but noted that first it is worth checking the forces on a simpler task. Marius insisted that they would complete all 3 tasks. The owner, noticing his confidence, warned that recklessness could cost life. Marius replied that they would prepare. They returned to the tavern, feeling fatigue. Lying in the room, Dallin wondered if they would really be able to cope. Annette was worried that it seemed too hard, but Ben supported her, adding that he could not ignore other people's problems. She suggested that Griffin could have obeyed her. Annette decided to try to avoid violence, and Marius promised to provide her protection. They realized that they ate almost nothing throughout the day. Dallin confessed that he did not want to eat at the bar. He noted that the sun was already setting and suggested going to the yard. The hotel manager greeted them and asked if they had time to look at the city. Annette became interested in the beauty of the evening. Marius replied that the city seems peaceful. He decided not to mention the dirty bar. They helped cover the table and dinner together. The baked steak was delicious, and the stars over their head created a magical atmosphere.